Good evening. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here this evening for Hot Bestsellers with Nita Prose and Jessamine Chan. My name is Leah Tottenham. I'm from the Vancouver Public Library's Programming and Learning team, and I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that my home and the Vancouver Public Library are located on the traditional and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This evening's Incite event is presented in partnership between the Vancouver Writers Fest and the Vancouver Public Library. Before we get started on the main event, I'd like to take the opportunity to share some upcoming library programs with you. If you're looking to connect with other book lovers in Vancouver, then please join our enthusiastic library staff and your fellow avid readers online this Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. for our monthly Book Lovers Reading Circle. Together, we'll discuss our latest and greatest must-reads across all genres. Come prepared with a couple of titles to share, or simply sit back and listen to others. Either way, you'll be guaranteed to leave with a whole new stack of ideas for your 2022 reading list. VPL is also happy to announce that Vancouver's next Poet Laureate has been selected. Fiona Tinway Lamb will serve as the City of Vancouver's Poet Laureate for the next 2 years, and her City Poems contest is now in full swing. Whether you're an emerging poet or an established writer, Fiona encourages you to submit your original poetic work that celebrates a historical, cultural, or ecological site in Vancouver that intrigues or inspires you. Winners will be announced this June. For more information about these and other events, please visit vpl.ca/events or sign up for our email newsletter. And now I'd like to welcome Leslie Hertig, Artistic Director for the Vancouver Writers Fest.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Leah. It's lovely to see you again this year. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to our second Incite of 2022, presented in partnership with the Vancouver Public Library and TELUS. My name, well, you already know my name. I'm not going to start with my name. You know it. We're so glad you could join us here. And we're presenting a conversation between two authors who have each rocketed to the top of bestseller lists with deliciously compelling new debut novels. Jessamine Chan and Nita Prose are our guests this evening. These are the books available at your favorite independent booksellers. I'd like to take a moment now to appreciate our event partner, the Vancouver Public Library, who has made it possible for us to present conversations like this one free of charge. Thanks also to our government sponsors, the Government of Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of BC, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island. Along with TELUS, they make this possible. And just a reminder that the Vancouver Writers Fest presents year-round events, and updates on those can always be found on our website. Mark your calendars for our Incite events that happen every other Wednesday between now and the end of June. Coming up next, I'm really excited to say that we'll be featuring a conversation on February 23rd between Pulitzer Prize-winning author Marlon James in conversation with Women's Prize nominee Cherie Jones, speaking about the second title in Marlon's Dark Star trilogy, Moon Witch Spider King, and information on that event will be available soon on our website. And now on to our event. Now, unfortunately, Ashley Audrain was meant to be joining us this evening. She had something urgent come up and she will not be able to be here. She was very kind to send along some of her notes. She adored these two titles that we're about to talk about, and I'm grateful to her for sharing those notes with me tonight so that I could step in a pinch. So, to introduce our wonderful authors, Jessamine Chan's debut novel, School for Good Mothers, has just hit the shelves and the bestseller list this past month. Reviews have been unanimous, using words like dazzling, prescient, and chilling. And as the Today Show put it, this debut novel was so captivating, thought-provoking, and beautifully written. Everything I tried to pick up next paled in comparison. It was all I wanted to talk about, think about, and read. Jessamine Chan joins us tonight from Chicago. And Nita Prose. Nita's debut novel, The Maid, currently sits with Fine Company atop, the very top of the bestseller lists in Canada, the US, and the UK, I understand. As the New York Times put it, The Maid is a rip-roaring mystery and an endearing debut with real emotional heft. But for grounded travelers, it also provides a much needed sojourn into the world of crisp sheets, room service, and constantly replenished Crabtree and Evelyn shampoos. Ah, I remember those days well, the days of travel. Nita is joining us this evening from Toronto, and I'd love them to turn on their cameras now, and there we go. I should point out that these two women are joining us from the Eastern time zones too. So big kudos to you for being here on the Pacific West Coast at 7 p.m., which is 10 p.m. for you. Welcome. Welcome to Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is an excellent reason to stay up past my bedtime.
Okay, good. Good. Jessamine, I love that big book cover in the background there. That's absolutely beautiful. That's a nice prop for you to have in these Zoom times, I think.
It's totally courtesy of my publisher. I would have never been organized enough to arrange it on my own, but thank you for that lovely introduction.
Lovely. Each of these books is an ingenious reincarnation of the genres that you're representing. For Nita, the good old-fashioned whodunit. For you, Jessamine, the psychological thriller. Certainly two very different kinds of novels, and they've both risen, as I said, to the top of the lists and literary scenes. But universal stories, I'd say, at their core, which perhaps is why they're resonating so strongly with such a wide base of readers. They feature heroines who are perhaps unrepresented or underrepresented in fiction. For you, Nita, Molly the Maid is someone who is socially and emotionally doesn't behave the way people expect her to behave, perhaps. And Frida, for you, Jessamine, is a Chinese American single mother who's flawed in her own ways and also vulnerable. Characters that I certainly am not going to forget. Can you each speak a bit about why you wanted to feature your protagonists in the way that you did? Jessamine, would you like to start?
Sure. For me, it was really important to center the story on an Asian American perspective. I think I was interested in telling the story through Frida's eyes, partly because she's an Asian American heroine who I hadn't necessarily seen on the page that much before. And I really wanted to write the Asian American heroine that I'd always wanted to read. I wanted to write someone flawed and desirous and selfish and vulnerable and someone who actually got a chance to be messy. And I was really interested in writing a character of color who wasn't noble in any way and wasn't necessarily immediately sympathetic and who would present the reader with some thorny moral questions throughout the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nita, how about you? Tell us about the framing of Molly the Maid.
Yes, well, as you say, she's a very socially awkward character, and she has really so much difficulty reading social cues. I guess my inspiration for her came some time ago, or at least part of the inspiration. Before I was an editor, I do work in book publishing, but before that, I taught students with special needs, and I taught high school, so they were generally teenagers. And something that was strange that happened was that I went in as a teacher, and of course I ended up coming out as a student myself in so many important ways. And something that I saw with these kids was when we went out into the world, they were so often treated with such callousness, and it was often difficult to take. However, what really stuck with me was how adaptable, how resilient, how unbelievably strong these kids were, so much more so than so-called normative people. And I think some of that that experience I really put into her perspective. And my goal with her really is to allow the reader to enter her mindset, to live as her, to see from behind her eyes. And my hope is that if you live as her for a bit, from her perspective, you do come to love her.
Yeah, definitely so. And with Jessamine, story as well, I would say you do just, you come to be rooting for this person. You've really both helped your characters to feel seen And I'm curious, have you heard this from readers, early readers of your books, that this is what you've achieved?
Those messages have been really gratifying. Nita, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. I have received a lot of those messages, and I have to say they're incredibly gratifying and relieving too, don't you find?
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I have to confess, I have not read all the Amazon and Goodreads reviews. I'm very grateful to everyone who takes the time to write the reviews, but everyone told me to look away and don't scroll down for the sake of my mental health. But the messages I've received from readers have been really profound. And I think because I'm writing about motherhood, people send really personal messages too. And like about their own struggles, about even the decision of whether or not to have a baby. And so I feel like I've been trusted with a lot of stories too, and I'm very honored.
That's a really interesting outcome. Did you expect to be put in that place where you were almost offering up support in that way?
I go ahead. I can say that I really didn't plan for that. I didn't plan for people to be reaching out really on a daily basis, many times a day, and saying, Molly is my niece, Molly is my granddaughter, Molly is my, insert X. That recognizability to me is incredibly hopeful. And as you say, it's taking this character from invisibility to visibility, which was really important to me. And yeah, it's incredibly gratifying.
I would love to share with our viewers tonight your voices, and perhaps I'd like now to ask if you would each read a piece from your book. Would you do that for us?
Sure. Who should go first?
Well, how about Nita?
Sure. Okay, so I will read from the prologue. And this is how the book begins. I am your maid. I'm the one who cleans your hotel room, who enters like a phantom when you're out gallivanting for the day. No care at all about what you've left behind, the mess, or what I might see while you're gone. I'm the one who empties your trash, tossing out the receipts you don't want anyone to discover. I'm the one who changes your sheets, who can tell if you slept in them and if you were alone last night or not. I'm the one who straightens your shoes by the door, who puffs up your pillows and finds stray hairs on them. Yours? Not likely. I'm the one who cleans up after you drink too much and soil the toilet seat, or worse. When I am done my work, I leave your room pristine. Your bed is perfectly made with 4 plump pillows, as though no one has ever lain there. The dust and grime you left behind has been vacuumed into oblivion. Your polished mirror reflects your face of innocence back at you. It's as though you were never here. It's as though all of your filth, all of your lies and deceit have been erased. I am your maid. I know so much about you. But when it comes down to it, what do you know about me?
I love that. And it's fun to hear you read it with that tone, because it's more assertive than I was reading it myself. So that gives me a pause for how I was imagining Molly to be. That's good. Jessamine, how about you? Would you share with us?
I'm going to copy Nita and just read the first 2 pages also. So The School for Good Mothers is about a Chinese-American single mom who loses custody of her daughter, Harriet, and has to spend a year at an imaginary government-run reform school. So the inciting incident for the book is Frida's very bad day. So I'm just going to read 2 pages from the very beginning. We have your daughter. It's the first Tuesday in September, the afternoon of her one very bad day, and Frida is trying to stay on the road. On the voicemail, the officer tells her to come to the station immediately. She pauses the message, puts down her phone. It's 2:46 p.m. She meant to get home an hour and a half ago. She pulls onto the first side street off Grace Ferry and double parks. She calls back and begins apologizing, explaining that she lost track of time. Is she okay? The officer says the child is safe. Ma'am, we've been trying to reach you. Frida hangs up and calls Gus, has to leave a message. He needs to meet her at the station at 11th and Wharton. There's a problem, it's Harriet. Her voice catches. She repeats the officer's promise that their daughter is safe. As she begins driving again, she reminds herself to stay under the speed limit, to avoid running red lights, to breathe. All through Labor Day weekend, she felt frantic. Last Friday and Saturday, she had her usual insomnia, sleeping 2 hours each night. On Sunday, when Gus dropped off Harriet for Frida's 3.5 days of custody, Harriet was in the throes of an ear infection. That night, Frida slept 90 minutes. Last night, an hour. Harriet's crying has been relentless, too big for her body, too loud for the walls of their tiny house to absorb. Frida did what she could. She sang lullabies, rubbed Harriet's chest, gave her extra milk. She laid on the floor next to Harriet's crib, held her impossibly perfect hand to the bars, kissed her knuckles, her fingernails, feeling for the ones that needed to be trimmed, praying for Harriet's eyes to close. The afternoon sun is burning as Frida pulls up to the station, located 2 blocks from her house in an old Italian neighborhood in South Philly. She parks and rushes to the reception desk, asks if the receptionist has seen her daughter, a toddler, 18 months old, half Chinese, half white, big brown eyes, curly dark brown hair with bangs. You must be the mother, the receptionist says. Thank you.
These moments, the way that you framed her, she's flawed, but aren't we all flawed? And this is the thing that went through my mind reading your book was this person is not much different than I am on one of my bad days as a mother when I forget to pick the child up at school because I had said I was going to. These things happen. So it, again, so gripping through the whole way, but cheering for her to come out the other side of that intact. I'm not going to give anything away. It's very good. So on that topic, both of your books are so propulsive, and the momentum, it's hard to sustain as a writer, I would imagine. I found myself looking at this and wondering, how did you create this? What was the framework for these books? From a craft perspective, I'm curious to know, can you speak a bit about how conscious you were, or perhaps not conscious at all, of this propelling motion as you were writing? I'm curious to know, did you have it planned out ahead of time? There's a lot of inner monologue, for instance, Jessamine, in yours, yet it still feels dynamic. Was that intentional?
I'll take the baton first for this one. So the book really grew out of my intense ambivalence and anxiety about whether or not to have a baby. And I started the project back in 2014. And a few months before that, I'd read an article in the New Yorker called "Where is Your Mother" by the journalist Rachel Aviv, which is about a single mom who left her toddler son at home, and after that day never got him back. And it really talked about her nightmarish experience with the family court system. And something about that story really stayed with me. So I didn't sit down with a plan thinking that this is the creative spark for a fictional project, but I think a kernel of rage just lodged in my mind. And what really struck me was also that the mother in that story was an immigrant. And it felt like not just that she was being judged by this impossible set of standards, but they were judging her by a very Western, very American set of standards, which just felt so unfair. And so those were that was the emotional engine and the subject matter engine driving the project. But the propulsive feeling in the finished book definitely only happened through editing. My early drafts were an unfathomable number of pages long, and I'd written the whole thing longhand, and I forced myself to get all the way into the very last scene before I started cutting, because I not to Nita's extent, but in my own small way, I've worked as an editor in my professional life, and so I love cutting stuff, and I knew that if I started cutting my own words, that it would be 5 pages by the end. So I forced myself to write the whole thing through, but then the actual momentum was all through editorial choices and wanting to keep readers turning the pages by cutting the scene at a really exciting place, or leaving some stuff unsaid, or ending a chapter on a point of tension. So I'm glad that the result felt that way.
For those who, haven't been through this process of editing like that, how long does that sort of process happen? How many times does it pass back and forth between you and an editor?
Oh, for myself and my friends who are reading, I have no idea how many times, because it went on for so many years. But I worked on developmental edits with my first editor, Dawn Davis, for about 9 months.
Okay. Thank you. Nita, same question to you. And it, the concept of the locked room mystery, nowhere to go, natural tensions, it's only part of the way that you moved it on through. Can you tell us a bit more about how you structured it, or whether you were aware of what you were doing as you were writing?
Sure. I think Jessamine used a word that's very important, and that's engine. So I can talk about sort of two engines that were driving forces. So the first was completely accidental, and it's one of those gift of the gods engines that just descends upon you. I did not plan to write this as my debut novel. It wasn't like I decided, oh, I'm going to become a novelist now. The idea really struck me out of the blue, and it happened in 2019, and I was staying at a London area hotel. And I left, and I came back a little while later, and I completely startled the roommate who was cleaning the room. And, I remember opening the door and her jumping back into a shadowy corner. And embarrassingly, she had my track pants in her hands, which of course I'd left in a tangled mess on my bed. And I looked at her and I thought, it's such an invisible and intimate job to be a roommate. She'd been cleaning my room every day, so she knew so much about me, but I knew nothing about her. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, Leslie, like little things, how they sort of stick in your mind and you're not aware that they're going to have an impact. Well, a few days later, I was on my plane ride home, and that's when I started to hear that voice, Molly's voice, clean and crisp and precise. And, I grabbed the napkin from under my drink because I didn't have any paper, and I started to write that voice. I wrote that prologue, which I just read, in a single burst. And even then, I wasn't aware that I was actually starting my debut novel. So that really was one of the engines. And then, further along, when I decided, okay, I'm going to really tackle this and see, if I can do it. Mm-hmm. There is a great gift to the mystery genre, and then there are the tricky parts. So the gift is the engine, and the engine comes with the genre itself. A whodunit, well, the engine is whodunit. We know what we're looking for. We know why we're reading. We know why we're writing. So that's all great and dandy. But the very difficult part of the mystery is that it's such a well-trodden genre. There are so many masters from Agatha Christie on up. And so many people have done it so well that the challenge for any writer trying to tackle it is how to innovate. Mm-hmm. And so for me, one of the engines that kept me writing was, combining genres. So, is it possible to have a whodunit on the one hand, but combine that with that spirit of uplit, or feel-good fiction, as they call it in North America, where we have a journey of the spirit, a journey propelled by hope. Can I Frankenstein these two notions together and find in this narrative propulsion? So that became sort of my mantra and my goal.
Were you a big whodunit reader before you started?
As much as I am anything else, and I am such an omnivore. But for me, because I'm an editor, I'm fascinated by genre, the limitations of it and the innovations that are possible. So that for me was an exciting problem to try to solve.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Keeping on this theme a bit, endings, of course, are tricky to talk about because we don't want to give away any spoilers in either case, but both endings of these books are so memorable. Nita, your book held close, and Jessamine, I can't quite remember being so moved by a last chapter than I was by yours. It was difficult to read, but also, quite exquisite at the same time. And again, back to the Maid, I just, who done it? Who done this thing? So, Nita, because your book is a mystery, and there are twists that are so central, did you know when you were writing this how it was going to end, or did you
Yeah.
surprise yourself?
No, I did know. So, one of the things that kept me writing and part of my motivation was knowing a couple of things. So I think of myself as a tentpole writer. So, I know my twists and turns, I know where I'm heading, but oh my goodness, I do not know how I'm going to get there. And that keeps me motivated to get up at 5 a.m. every morning and to, re-engage in that process of discovering how am I going to get there. And so, yeah, it's very, very helpful, I think, to know a few things, but not know everything.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. And Jasmine, for you, just again talking about endings, talking a bit, this is a bit of a craft part of our conversation here. Did you know where she was headed and what you were going to do? And again, I know I don't want you to give anything away.
Well, this project was pretty unusual for me compared to any other fiction I've written, because it really emerged. So Frida's Very Bad Day emerged out of a very good writing day for me, where it's the kind of day that you dream of having, where you're just lost in a trance for 6 hours and don't keep track of time. And I mean, in most of the time when that happens, you don't have the beginning of a novel. It's so I definitely, it took me several months of really just not necessarily, let me rephrase this. So it took me several months to gather up the courage to say, I'm going to start a book now. And it was really a teacher who I met at a conference that summer who said, I think this is the beginning of a novel. And that was a really crucial push. But I knew the ending that I was writing toward, because that very first day's work had pretty much the arc of the story, with Frida and Harriet's whole journey, and the women in pink lab coats and the dolls and the broken marriage and the other woman. And so I knew the shape, but it then took years to develop that promising draft into an actual manuscript that would be legible to other people.
Yeah. I am excited. I'm excited by the fact, again, that these are both debuts. And this is a unique thing. It's a very unique thing for debut books to shoot the way they have in both of your cases up those bestseller lists. So again, big kudos, and it makes it exciting. And it's a testament to the fact that, yes, these are two books that should be read for those voracious readers out there who just want to find these really compelling books. Prior to publishing these novels, you both had professional roles close to the publishing industry. For you, Nita, right in the publishing industry. Nita, you're an accomplished editor of many best-selling authors. Jasmine, you've done book editing, obviously, and these courses, and worked for Publishers Weekly, I believe. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
I haven't done actual book editing, but I did work at Publishers Weekly for several years after grad school.
My apologies. And I'm sure you've been asked quite a bit about how your previous roles prepared you to be an author. But perhaps can you share a memory or anecdotes from those experiences that stand out for you now that you're a published author, maybe something you've taken with you that you might offer as advice to folks who are perhaps writing their first draft or thinking, I'm ready to do this now, I want to try?
Well, what I can say is that, for me, it has been a real learning experience to be on the other side. So I am an editor. I continue to work as an editor. And, something that I was always keenly aware of in my editorial role is the vulnerability and tenderness it takes to go on that journey as a writer. And I've always, used the metaphor of the labyrinth to sort of describe what that's like for people, both the role of the editor and the role of the author. So, a writer is standing before the labyrinth of a narrative, of a story, and she has to go in there all alone, and she has to discover the twists and turns that are going to take her through the story and get her to the end. And so often, if she turns left, she will not realize for quite some time that she could write herself into a dead end and lose 6 months. So, the editor, however, is on a ladder outside of the labyrinth, and she's looking down, and she can say to the writer, oh, don't go left, because if you do, you're going to get to a dead end. And so there's this wonderful collaboration that happens, where two people are joining on this commitment to a creative journey and to figuring it out together. So I was so aware of that, but only in my ladder role. So once I had to step down and actually experience the other side and the abject panic and fear and that sort of blindness and disorientation that an author feels on the ground, wow, I will never edit the same way again, because now I know. Like, I knew before intellectually, but now I know viscerally.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. There are a lot of people involved too that you were used to working with on the other side that moved this along, I'm sure, right from the book designer to the marketing team and so on. Yeah. Jessamine, how about for you? How do you think your careers of the past have helped you along the way?
Well, I think what was impressed upon me when I worked at PW was how many people are involved in launching a book, and the tremendous amount of teamwork and people power it takes to make an impact. And so I feel really, really grateful for how the launch has gone. It's really beyond my wildest dreams, and is the work of so many people at my publishing company, and also we at PW were part of like building buzz for a book. And so I definitely have benefited from many publications and journalists like getting behind the story. And so there has to be a lot of pieces that fall into place. And one thing that I noticed at PW, especially when I was still many, many years away from even starting this project, was just the sheer number of debuts that come out each season. And so when I spoke to editors in the process of selling my book, they were saying, like, what is your biggest dream? And I think they wanted me to say something bigger, but I told them that my biggest dream was to just stay in print and to have an impact beyond my pub month or my pub season, because I mean, in publishing, it's always the next thing and the next thing. And so I think the dream is to have a book that lasts beyond its moment.
Yeah. Now, and in your case, Jessamine, this book comes along at a time, I mean, I'm sure we obviously it took you years to write. You weren't expecting the pandemic, but the ways in which this pandemic world we're living in now, not to mention the political upheaval that we're seeing in Canada, but even more so, obviously, for you in the United States. Did you imagine that this time we were in now, when your book would be published, would resonate differently from how you wrote it? Because it's a dystopian story to begin with. Did you imagine the dystopia becoming too real?
I did a Q&A with the novelist Jennifer Hay, who wrote Mercy Street, and we were talking about how our books were prescient in ways that no one would ever want them to be, because it's more a reflection of like just how bad the world has gotten, that they feel so realistic. And hers is about an abortion clinic, so it's crazy to think that at some point her book will be read as historical fiction of a time when like women still had the right to choose all over America. So I certainly couldn't have predicted the political climate that my book would be born into. And when I did an event with Liz Moore in Philadelphia, when I did have a chance to do an in-person event, which was so exciting, she read back to me a paragraph from chapter 1 that she said to her the book felt like a horror novel, but the paragraph that she picked out was actually about Frida trying to get work done while her toddler is like climbing all over her and like getting in the way, and how that really just captured what it was like to work at home during the pandemic. So I think Frida's work life and her struggles are probably much more tangible now after 2 years of this than when because I mean the the opening chapter has been this way for years. It just reads really differently now.
Does it make it more difficult for you to talk about now, or to frame in conversations like this one? Are you feeling you're having to get more political than perhaps you would have pre-pandemic?
Oh, I'm happy to get political. America is a very troubled place right now. There's a lot to talk about what's wrong. I think what's been really surprising in the pandemic is that now the challenges that parents face and that mothers face and that women face are all being talked about all the time. It's just that nothing's getting better in terms of policy or support. So there's a lot of focus on all the pressures that mothers are facing right now, but it's all just in the media. So that's one of the many things that's sad about this current moment.
Yeah. It becomes a new role of yours, though, when you have to, speak to that, perhaps, but you do it very well. I would love to come back again to the conversation of writing itself, to talk a bit about your relationship with writing. Nita, you referred to this briefly a few moments ago when you talked about getting up at 5 a.m. to write. I'm just curious to know, though, in your work lives, which involve more than just writing, what role does writing play in your life now and before? And how do you incorporate writing into your daily life? What does that mean to you to be able to work on something in a consistent manner?
Well, I think as an editor, I write every day. There isn't a day that has gone by in the last 15 years that I haven't written something, whether that is copy for a book, a presentation, all kinds of things that our editors are called upon to draft and to be very much part of, that promotional machine that helps us discover books. Also, I'm a ghostwriter. So part of my work and the different sort of part of my job as an editor is that I have ghostwritten many, many books. However, let's just say they have all been nonfiction. So it was still a very big creative leap for me to go from working in the nonfiction realm to working in the realm of the novel. But of course, I credit my authors and this industry with having taught me so much that I was able to do this book and to write fairly quickly. I mean, I still had to get up every day at 5 a.m. and devote every Saturday and Sunday and so on and so forth. But, I feel like I've learned a lot from the work I've done with my authors.
Mm-hmm. Jessamine, how do you incorporate writing? Is it a daily practice for you?
In ideal times, it's a daily practice. I'm very lucky to be writing full time right now, and I'm definitely count my blessings every day to be able to do that. I think I will first say that any writing that happens is because of having childcare and a supportive partner, because I have a 5-year-old, and childcare is how this book got finished during the pandemic and would not have happened without it. So I have gotten some questions about how I balance motherhood and writing. I'm like, there is no balance, there's childcare. And so I've been fortunate enough to be able to have access to that. And I just wish that we in America are very envious of the more affordable childcare and like the more fair family leave that you have in Canada. So I know it's not perfect, but to Americans, Canada seems so much better. But in terms of my writing practice, I'm someone who definitely has to be very offline and scribbling in a notebook. So at the moment, I'm not working on anything, but I think when I do start writing fiction again, it will be like after turning off Twitter and turning off Instagram and like going to hide and pretend that no one's ever going to see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a question here on my sheet that is one that Ashley had wanted to ask you both. she was asking this actually of you, Jasmine, again, and was asking on behalf of Nita and herself to say, what's it like as a debut author to actually get to present your book in front of a live audience, which is something in the United States that has been an opportunity you've had. Whereas for Nita, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you haven't yet had the opportunity to do that here in Canada just because of various protocols and such. So how has that been for you, or how do you I'd love to hear from both of you. Releasing a debut book in COVID times, what's that? What's the experience like?
Well, I'm glad to even like have experience to draw on to be able to tell you about, because it was unclear until probably 5 days before I was supposed to go on the trip if I was actually going to be getting on the plane. So I think January involved a lot of sitting with a lot of uncertainty. Certainly I had a mostly in-person tour planned that got changed like one event at a time, and sometimes at the very last minute. So there was a lot of extra work for my publicists and all the event coordinators at the bookstores, and it was I don't think publicists expect to have like CDC level discussions all the time. Part of the job during COVID, but I did finally get to Philadelphia, where I had been living in Philadelphia for about 7 years before moving back to Chicago, where I'm from. And so I got to go back to Philly to a crowd of mostly friends, which was really exciting at the Free Library. And it was honestly like a lot of fun to do an event on stage and feel the warmth and joy from the crowd, and it even everyone with masks on to like feel the general cheer was really exciting. And it was really exciting to meet readers. I did an event in Philly and then an event in Harrisburg, and one of the coolest things in Harrisburg was several high school students came, and I almost wanted to burst into tears, like having these high school seniors who wanted to have their mom take their picture with me and talked about how they want to write novels too. And like for two of them, they'd never been to an author event before. So I was very honored that they came to mine, especially because I was in their shoes when I was 16, going to a reading by Amy Tan, who was my idol when I was in high school. And so obviously I'm not Amy Tan. No one can ever be Amy Tan, but for 2 minutes I got to pretend. And it was just very exciting to talk to the new generation.
I'm really glad you got that opportunity. And I have a feeling you're going to have more to come. Goodness. This book has legs on it, I think. So have more. Nita, how about for you? What have your expectations been? I'm always curious to know, was there ever any like, oh, could we delay publication of this? Can we just see what's going to happen with this virus? Maybe that is never up to the author at all, and the publisher makes that decision. But how has it been for you, Nita?
Well, it has been extremely strange, right? And I think Jasmine and I are both in the strange position of, there's so much to celebrate, and how does one do that? Exactly. I'm thrilled that Jasmine has gotten out and had this experience of actually meeting people who have read the book. I have not had that experience yet, but I really do look forward to it. But there are pluses and minuses to everything. And one of the great pluses is that we've really gotten used to doing these sorts of events, which allow a kind of accessibility, which was previously unheard of. And that is a piece of this that I really enjoy. I love finding out that, someone in the Yukon was listening, and then they sent me an email afterwards. People are coming from far and wide to books, and they're coming for solace and, a new way of thinking in these very difficult times. And I think that, we are the beneficiaries of that in a lot of ways. I did go out once, though. I went out. I left the country for like a day, and it was so exciting. So for Good Morning America, I had to, tape this in advance. So I flew out to New York. And, the protocols to, get all the testing and make sure everything's okay and get on the plane and get back in one day were absolutely insane. And one of the issues that I discovered in that funny way was, it was a long day of flying and getting to where I was going. And then I got to my hotel room. I'm about to tape the show the next day. And I took off my mask. And of course I had giant black marks down my face, bruises, because I'd been in a mask all day. Of course, the next day I have to appear on TV. So that was really exciting. That took a lot of makeup.
The things you never would have imagined a couple years ago.
Never would have crossed my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that we've all been doing more of in the past couple of years is streaming shows, and the number of remarkable books that have been turned into movies and TV series, I think have just skyrocketed due to the demand. So you've both found some success here. How do you feel about that world and the idea of your characters moving into an on-screen presence? What's that like?
I'm gonna let Nita go first because I think hers is farther along.
Well, I think it's tremendously exciting, first of all. But for me, when I finished this book and when the day it was published was really an important moment. I felt that was the day the book wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to everybody else. It belonged to readers. And I also feel that way about the potential film. So, Universal Pictures has optioned the film, and Florence Pugh, who of course was in Black Widow and Midsummer and Little Women, is set to star. And what I can say, there's a lot I cannot say, but what I can say is that for me, something that is so tremendously exciting and something that I know so well from the publishing world, and we talked a little bit about this before, is when you're a creator, having other creators come in and participate in that journey and take your work to a whole other realm, to me, that is the most exciting, thrilling thing. It can go wrong. And yes, we all have our fears, about what can go wrong. But when it goes right, it is just complete and utter magic. And I can say that so far on this journey, I'm in the magic zone.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're a little earlier in the process still. So the pieces that are on the internet that I can tell you about are Jessica Chastain's company, Freckle Films, is the production company that optioned my book, which is thrilling beyond belief. And Endeavor Content, the studio behind the recent film The Lost Daughter, is partnered with Freckle Films and then with the director Jude Wang. So they're the creative team attached to the project right now. And it's really, really exciting to finally be able to share that news. And I think it'll be by the time there is a show, knock on wood, that hopefully will happen. I think it will be really exciting to potentially have a 1-hour drama with an Asian American lead, because that's still pretty rare. And to have a story that's a lot about American society, but told through an Asian American perspective, I think will be really exciting. But I think there will be a lot of big changes, because the book has a lot of sitting and thinking, which is not really what drives 1-hour dramas. So I think there probably is going to be a little bit more action on the screen. And for me, I'm on board as an executive producer, which right now involves learning and cheering everyone on. But I think what I'm really excited to nerd out about is the art direction and costume design. I love those elements, and I would love to chime in if anyone wants to hear my opinion about that.
Speaking of exactly that, I was going to ask you both if you had any input on your covers. I know authors don't always, but they're both so beautiful and really, they're stunning. They're eye-catching. I'm just curious. Can you tell me, did you have art direction over your cover?
I love my cover so much, and I'm completely obsessed with it. The cover designer Grace Han and our art director Jackie Seo really knocked it out of the park. And so what I contributed was a document of a wish list of some of the films and some of the other books that I was interested in, and talking about imagery that might speak to me. My agent also had me prepare some examples of covers I loved and covers I didn't like as much.
Mhm.
So I definitely suggested like some kind of ominous pink image, but I would have never come up with the receding doorway. And it has this feeling of like a portal to another world, which was a really brilliant way of interpreting the story.
Perfect. Yeah. And likewise, Nita, yours too is really top notch. Are you happy with it?
I'm delighted with it. And yes, I had some involvement for sure in the brief. And, you know, for me, I wanted to make sure that something on the cover suggested a lot about the world. And I wanted there to be an element of seen and unseen, visible and invisible. Yeah. And, you know, I think the keyhole motif with the little maid who's running through it gives a sense, such a quick sense of the kind of world we're about to enter, along with that sort of Art Deco minimalism.
Yeah, exactly.
That really sets us up for the milieu of the Regency Grand Hotel, this 5-star Art Deco hotel that features in the book.
Yeah, covers are important.
Yes, you don't judge a book by them, but you do.
You do. Yeah, it's true. It's so true. I'd like to move to a couple questions from our viewers tonight, if I may. And the first one is from Michelle Cormack. They ask, I read something recently that said people become free first in literature. I'm wondering if there's any particular literature that has encouraged your own creative freedom. Thank you too for your great books. So that is, you know, and I will say that Ashley had also prepared a similar question, just asking you about which books inspire you, and what are your current favorite reads? We'd love to know.
Jasmine, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I have to admit I have a cheat sheet here, because when I always, like, during interviews when I have to name book titles, I always kind of draw a blank. One big inspiration for this book was definitely Never Let Me Go. I love the Kazuo Ishiguro novel, and I really love The New Wilderness by Diane Cook and her first collection, Man v. Nature. So one of the stories in that collection definitely was a big inspiration for the world of the school. But I'm over the years, I'm a big reader of Wuthering Heights, and I love the poet Anne Carson. And I mean, I owe a huge debt, as everyone does, who writes feminist dystopian books about government oppression. Everyone owes a debt to The Handmaid's Tale, which is a perfect book in pretty much every way. And I mean, one book that I really, really love that's a recent read that's a little more obscure that I love talking about is the novel Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls, which is about an unhappy housewife who falls in love with a mysterious sea creature who's escaped from a nearby lab. And it's an incredibly beautiful, hilarious, profound story. And it's like this is probably one of the strangest books you'll ever read, but is also really a perfect novel in its own way.
I've made note. That's good. That sounds highly intriguing to me. How about you, Nita? Tell us a little bit about who inspires you.
Sure. I think, I drew from several inspirations for this novel. Obviously the Agatha Christie sort of trope is very much something that I play with and call out in this novel. But if you've seen the film Knives Out, that was also sort of on my mood board, this quirky world of characters, solving a whodunit. And then I think if you add a smattering of the board game Clue and you mixed all of this together, you come out with something that looks a little bit like The Maid. And then I think Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman is a book that, seismically changed genres. I mean, it was really the first time that a book like that, became a global phenomenon. And when we had a cactus sort of character, a really prickly protagonist who somehow is able to hold that journey of spirit and hope from page one to the end. So those are some of sort of my moods, I would say, and the great writers who went before me that I was definitely influenced by. And then in terms of what I read now, I mean, as I say, I am an omnivore. I read everything. So one book that I'm absolutely loving and talking about all the time right now is Wahala by Nikki May, an Anglo-Nigerian debut author, just like Jessamine and I. And this is a wonderful genre bender too, because on one hand, it's a thriller, but it posits all of the lives of these contemporary women in London who are dealing with race, with gender, with motherhood, and they all seem so utterly recognizable. They are, your friend next door, the colleague you work with, they're so well known to us, and their spirits are so known. And I just think she has a very fresh, witty, sharp take on women. And it slowly starts. What looks like a book about female friendship is also just as much about frenemies as we get further into the book. And I think both of those takes are fascinating.
So, okay, I've got Ms. Caliban and Wahala. Is that what
Wahala?
you said?
Yes, which
Wahala.
means
Okay,
trouble,
excellent.
trouble.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I have another question here, and it is, as debut authors, do you have any writing advice on how to take up a manuscript and get it published? What's your advice there? And I know it's hard, but as professionals, you can maybe give a couple tips on what you. Yeah.
My first thing is dial it back. Before you start with the dream of getting published, first of all, make sure you understand writing. And part of understanding writing, the advice that I always give is start with reading. And I know that really does dial it back a few notches, but you've heard tonight from both Jessamine and I how much we've learned from the process of reading other people's work. And when I mean read, I don't just mean read for, enjoyment, pleasure, entertainment, satisfaction. I mean, read that way, the first read. And then on your second, try to understand how this work was put together. And, that's how you can really build a repertoire of understanding around, the essential components of narrative that are going to make a work tick, that are going to make it come alive.
I would start with saying to keep going, because the journey is a long one. I started writing when I was 18 in college, and I'm 43 now. And so it's been a very, very long journey to get to the first book. I certainly wasn't writing this book the whole time, but I was writing fiction and dreaming of the first book, even though so many years passed without anything tangible to show toward this writing dream of mine. And so I would say that committing to the process and knowing that the results are not going to be immediate is kind of a daily struggle, and one that you have to be prepared for. But also, on a practical note, I highly encourage everyone to stay off the internet as much as possible, because I feel like that the advice a lot of writers are getting now is that they need to build a platform in order to sell their book. And so I'm happy to represent the other side of things, because I didn't have any public social media accounts until I sold my book, and that was fine. The book has done fine. I didn't have a big digital footprint. I was working steadily on my craft and learning about writing, but it's not like you can follow that whole experience online, because I just was not a person on the internet. I was just a private person living life and trying to realize this dream. But it's okay to not share every part of the process with the world on social media if like me, you're a private person who wants to just experience it on your own. So so there definitely is a lot of pressure from the industry, I think, to come into a book deal with like 10,000 Twitter followers, but it is okay to focus on the book first.
I think that's really good advice, because it's true. If you are on Twitter and you are following 1,000 different authors, you will get the sense that that's the only way to do it. But quite right, many authors are not on social media at all and doing quite well. Thank you very much. So that's good. Yeah, thank you. I think we have time for just maybe one or two more questions before we bid you good night and let you go to sleep in your now almost 11 o'clock time zone. Just kind of coming back to this strange time that we're living in, what are you both looking forward to right now? What is kind of keeping you going? What do you in terms of your art, for instance, what's moving you forward?
Well, I think for me, I'm really looking forward to getting back to my 5 a.m. schedule, and, those liminal times in the morning where everything is just one step closer to the dream world and just seems more accessible, where reality isn't quite awake yet and interfering with the process. For me, that is a really important time. And at the moment, I'm in, promotion mode, and I'm very happy to be in that mode. But I look forward to those moments when I can turn my attention to what I'm going to do next and give it real focus, and just let that process unfold.
Thank you, Nita.
Yeah, I agree. I am also in promotion mode, which is a beautiful experience in its own way, but I do definitely miss writing, and I'm excited to see what will happen now that I've spent so many years with this project that it's taking a little bit of time to shake it off, to start thinking about other things, but I'm excited to see where my imagination goes once there's a little more quiet time to do that. But I've been involved, I think, over email and Slack channels with a lot of the other debut authors from 2021 and 2022. So one of the exciting things is just to see everyone's books coming out, because we've all been in touch, kind of cheering each other on, debuting during a pandemic and feeling like we're all in this together. And it's really exciting to like help boost those books and to get a chance to finally read them. But in regular life, my daughter just got her second vaccine dose 2 weeks ago, so we're very excited about the prospect of indoor play dates again, and maybe going to museum every so often. I mean, we've had a very cloistered existence for a long time, and she's very aware of that and has started demanding more indoor adventures.
Mm-hmm. Well, and none of us know, of course, what this year holds for us and where this pandemic is going to go. But I, of course, hope, along, I know you do too, that we can start to attend festivals and travel around a bit more, and have generative conversations with one another face to face, because that's really where understanding and creativity and things bubble up and become new projects and new ideas. So consider this an invitation, once you are traveling again and once things are feeling safer, to come and join us in Vancouver. We'd love to have you on stage here and introduce you to your fans. I would like to say a big thanks again to Ashley Audrain. Her book is The Push. If you haven't read that one yet, it's another fantastic read. Thank you to Ashley for helping me prepare tonight. Thank you especially to you two. And again, here are the books available in your favorite bookstore now. It was a delight to get to speak with you both tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. It was wonderful to meet both of you.
Please be well. And thank you to our viewers. Thank you to the Vancouver Public Library and to TELUS. We look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks for our next Incite event. Good night.
Thanks so much.
Good night, everyone.